Think the stores you grew up with are too familiar to ever really disappear? You've probably driven past one this week without really thinking about it. A strip mall you've known your whole life. Half the signs are gone. The windows are dark. A few units have paper taped over the glass. You noticed it for maybe a second, then kept going. Most people just blame Amazon or say these companies didn't keep up with the times. But here's what that explanation actually misses. This isn't about keeping up. It's not about apps or algorithms or any one bad business decision. Something deeper is breaking down underneath American retail right now. The stores going dark aren't the problem. They're the evidence. In a single year, retail bankruptcies jumped nearly 17%, the biggest wave since the pandemic. And the names on that list aren't small or obscure. They're places millions of Americans walked into every single week for decades. By the time we get to number 1, you'll see that every single closure on this list is pointing at the exact same thing. Let's get into it. Number 10, H.H. Gregg. Before the restaurants started closing, before the dollar stores went under, there were the appliance showrooms. Walking into an H.H. Gregg used to feel like something. Wide aisles, everything lit up perfectly. Refrigerators lined up in rows. Televisions so sharp you'd literally stop mid-stride just to look. A couple moving into their first place together could spend a whole afternoon in a store like that. They weren't just shopping, they were planning, picturing what the next chapter of their life was going to look like. H.H. Gregg was built for exactly that feeling. After its first bankruptcy in 2017, the company tried to come back, leaner, more focused on digital, a new cost structure built for a harder retail environment. The people running it genuinely believed the brand still had a future. They were wrong, not because of the strategy, because of what was happening outside the store. By 2024, existing home sales had fallen more than 20% compared to the year before. Mortgage rates had climbed above 7%. And here's the thing about appliances. People don't buy them in the abstract. They buy them when they buy a house. When home purchases dried up, everything inside H.H. Gregg stopped moving too. The refrigerators just sat there. The washing machines collected dust. Televisions piled up on the floor. And the costs kept coming regardless. Commercial rents up nearly 25%. Warehouse insurance up close to 20%. Freight costs still running about 40% above where they were before the pandemic. The digital sales they needed to cover all of that never got close to the scale that would have made a difference. Losses piled up every quarter. Inventory got older, faster than it sold. What H.H. Gregg really shows us is pretty simple. This chain existed to serve one specific moment, moving up. Buying your first big appliances for your first real home. When that moment became financially out, of reach for the people it was built for, everything built around that moment closed, right along with it. That's where this story starts. And it gets harder from here. Number 9, Red Lobster. Here's something most people got completely wrong about Red Lobster. When it filed for bankruptcy with over $1 billion in debt, the story everyone ran with was the endless shrimp promotion, the one that reportedly cost the company tens of millions because too many customers showed up and ate way too much. It became a joke, a textbook example of corporate incompetence. But that whole framing misses the point. The endless shrimp promotion didn't kill Red Lobster. It just made the collapse visible a little earlier than it might have been otherwise. Red Lobster lived in a very specific lane. Not fine dining, not fast food. It was the affordable special occasion. The birthday dinner for a parent who never really asked for much. The anniversary for a couple who couldn't justify spending more. A place that quietly told you, you've worked hard enough. You deserve to sit down and be served a real meal. That lane is gone now. Seafood prices climbed more than 28%. Restaurant rents rose over 20%. Electricity hit record highs in pretty much every state they operated in. Labor costs across the restaurant industry went up 18%, and the profit margin that used to sit near 10%, which was already pretty thin, collapsed down to somewhere between 2 and 3%. At that margin, one slow month doesn't set you back, it ends you. Meanwhile, the families who used to fill those tables were doing their own math at home. Household savings were at their lowest point in over a decade. A modest dinner out for a family of 4, maybe $60 or $70, was now going head-to-head with a grocery bill that had grown by hundreds of dollars a month and utility costs that just kept climbing. The tradition didn't disappear all at once, it faded. One skipped month turned into 2. 2 turned into a habit. The booth sat empty. With over $1 billion in debt and interest payments consuming millions every month before a single employee even clocked in, there was no cushion left to absorb any of it. Thousands of workers lost their jobs. Hundreds of locations went dark in shopping corridors that were already struggling to stay full. This wasn't a story about shrimp. It was a story about what happens when the economy quietly prices a working family out of its own traditions. 2 restaurants gone, and we're only just getting started. Number 8, Rue 21. Every story so far has been about adults, working parents recalculating what they can afford week to week. But this one went younger. Rue 21 was a teen fashion brand, 600 stores at its peak. Prices low enough that a high schooler with a part-time job could actually walk in and walk out with a full bag. It wasn't really about the clothes, though. It was about the experience. The mall trip with your friends, trying things on, being part of whatever was happening socially when you were a teenager. That whole model is structurally finished now. Today, roughly 80% of what American teenagers spend on fashion happens online. Not because the mall disappeared, but because the platforms that replaced it were faster, cheaper, and built around algorithms that physical retail simply can't compete with. The audience moved on before Rue 21 could follow, but the costs didn't move with them. Leases signed back in the 90s and early 2000s, when malls were packed and foot traffic was essentially guaranteed, locked the brand into monthly obligations as high as $40,000 per location. Retail wages went up 15%. Employee health coverage costs climbed 20%. Workers started leaving for better-paying jobs elsewhere, which drove up training costs, made service worse, and pushed traffic even lower in stores that were already struggling. Picture a regional mall somewhere in the South. 10 years ago, the Rue 21 there was one of the busiest spots on a Saturday afternoon. Teenagers in and out constantly, seasonal sale signs in every window. By 2023, that same store had half the staff, a clearance section taking up a third of the floor, and barely any foot traffic, even on weekends. Half the anchor tenants nearby had already closed. Their storefronts were either papered over or turned into temporary pop-ups. Inventory debt passed $120 million. 9 straight quarters of negative cash flow. Digital efforts that came too late and with too little money to matter. But the real story here is the mall itself. It was never just a shopping center. It was a gathering place, a physical symbol of suburban prosperity. Something built by and for a middle class that is now getting squeezed from every direction. As that happened, the malls emptied out. Rue 21 didn't just lose its customers, it lost the whole commercial world that made its existence possible. Number 7, Joann. Out of everything on this list, this one hits differently. Joann wasn't selling entertainment or brand names, it was selling thread, fabric, yarn, the actual materials you need to make something with your own hands. And the people who depended on it weren't casual shoppers, they were makers. People who sewed their own clothes, who quilted, who ran small businesses out of their homes, turning raw materials into income. Resourceful people, not wealthy ones. For more than 8 decades, Joann served that community. In 2024, it collapsed under more than $1 billion in debt. Here's what that actually looked like for someone real. A guy in his late 40s has been running a small upholstery repair business out of his garage for 15 years. His local Joanne has been part of his supply chain the whole time. He knows the layout by heart. He knows which staff members understand fabric weight. The prices have always been low enough that he can buy what he needs, do the job, and still charge his customers something fair. Then, wholesale fabric prices start climbing. The shelf prices follow. The store near him starts running out of things that used to always be in stock, so he starts making special trips. Then the store closes entirely. The nearest option is half an hour away, and honestly, no cheaper. His business still runs, but it's harder now. And the casual customers who used to stop in for small projects, the ones who kept the store's foot traffic alive between his bigger purchases, have already stopped coming. Because when your budget gets tight, hobbies are the first thing you cut. Not because they don't matter to you, but because you just can't justify them anymore. At its peak, Joanne ran more than 850 stores and employed over 20,000 people. Interest on its debt crossed $60 million a year by late 2024. Supply chain costs had surged 35%, collapsing margins to basically nothing, even while the brand tried to discount its way back. The pandemic DIY boom that briefly brought customers in was built on stimulus money. When that ran out, the underlying demand wasn't enough to keep the lights on. What disappears with Joanne isn't just a store count. It's the affordable infrastructure that let ordinary people make things. When that becomes out of reach, something small but real is lost. It won't make the news, but it matters. Number 6. TGI Fridays. Here's something worth actually sitting with for a moment. 2 casual dining chains, Red Lobster and TGI Fridays. Both institutions, both woven into the weekly rhythms of working American life for generations. Both collapsed within the same period, under almost identical financial pressure. That's not a coincidence, that's a pattern. TGI Fridays was the Friday release valve, the place you went when the week was finally done and you just needed to mark the end of it. Food, a drink, a booth somewhere in the back, where for an hour or two the grind was behind you. Modest, earned, reliable. By the end of 2024, nearly every U.S. location had closed. The numbers tracked almost exactly with Red Lobster's. Labor costs up 18%, food costs up 25%. Alcohol sales, historically the highest margin category for casual dining, declining because people were cutting back on anything that wasn't essential. Energy at decade highs. Average monthly operating losses at struggling locations exceeding $40,000. Think about what that actually means day to day. Before a single customer walked through the door in any given month, a location that was already struggling was in the red. Every dollar of margin had been eaten up by fixed costs before the dining room even opened. And then there was a shift that nobody in casual dining really had an answer for. App-based delivery had created a new normal, the premium home meal. Families who used to go out were now ordering from restaurants that could charge similar prices because those restaurants weren't carrying the overhead of a full dining room, a bar, and a floor full of servers. Same spending, just going somewhere else now. TGI Fridays had nothing to offer in that world. Its whole identity was the room, the atmosphere, the feeling of actually being there. In a delivery economy, that identity had no product to attach to. Hundreds of locations closed, thousands of workers let go. And that Friday night ritual, that simple weekly reminder that working life still had room for something good, quietly became something millions of people could no longer afford. Number 5. 99 cents only. A store went bankrupt because it was too cheap to stay open. That sentence should not make sense, but it does. And understanding exactly why tells you more about where this economy actually is than almost anything else on this list. 99 cents only wasn't mid-range retail. It wasn't selling anything aspirational to people who had other options. It was the store for people with the least. Canned food, cleaning supplies, paper products, basic household goods at or below $1. The price wasn't a selling point. It was the entire business model. In early 2025, all 371 locations liquidated. A store built specifically for the Americans who could afford the least was wiped out by inflation. The cost of stocking its own shelves with the same things it had always sold exceeded what it could actually charge and still pay its bills. The floor of the market just gave out. Energy costs up 35%, lease renewals up 22%. Wholesale prices on canned goods, cleaning products, and paper supplies up somewhere between 18% and 40%, depending on the item. If a can of soup cost 80 cents to get onto the shelf, selling it for 99 cents while paying rent, staff, and electricity wasn't a viable business. It was just a slow drain. And raising the price wasn't an option either, because the price was the store. The moment 99 cents only started charging $1.50, the brand ceased to exist. The name on the sign would have been a lie. Think about who got left behind when it closed. An older woman living alone on a fixed retirement income in a mid-sized southwestern city. She'd been shopping at her local 99 cents only for years. She knew exactly how far her monthly budget stretched inside that store. She planned around it. When it closed, she didn't find a simple alternative. Every option nearby was noticeably more expensive. On a fixed income, that's not a minor inconvenience. That's a compounding problem with no easy fix. When liquidation started, stores were clearing everything at 70% off. And here's the part that really sticks with you. Inside a store whose whole existence was built around being as cheap as possible, with prices down to fractions of a dollar, foot traffic was still weak. The people who most needed those prices had already run out of anything extra to spend. They weren't browsing clearance aisles. They were sitting at home working out which bills they could push back. Over 10,000 jobs gone. Hundreds of storefronts dark in neighborhoods that already didn't have many affordable options. When inflation wipes out the lowest price point in the entire market, there's nothing left underneath it to catch the fall. That's not a market correction. That's the floor giving out. Number 4, LL flooring. This one is probably the most straightforward cause and effect on the whole list. LL Flooring sold flooring. That's the entire business. And flooring isn't something people buy on impulse. It's a commitment. You buy it when you've just moved into a house, or when you've decided to stay somewhere long enough that improving it actually makes sense. It requires a certain kind of stability, a reasonable belief that your financial situation tomorrow is going to look roughly like it does today. Mortgage rates going above 7% removed that belief pretty much overnight. Existing home sales fell more than 20% compared to the year before. The buyers who would have walked into an LL flooring showroom after closing on a new home simply weren't there because those closings had stopped happening. And the homeowners who might have started a renovation were staying put, not wanting to spend money in an uncertain environment, and unable to sell anyway because giving up a locked-in low mortgage rate for a much higher one made no financial sense for most people. The company was carrying over $500 million in debt, 5 consecutive quarters of negative earnings, raw material costs, including lumber, vinyl, and adhesives, up between 30% and 45% since 2020. Each location costing roughly $120,000 a month just to stay open. Think about what a flooring contractor's year looked like in 2023. For a long time, a big chunk of his work came from new homeowners who wanted to upgrade right after moving in. Pull up the carpet, put down hardwood, replace the old kitchen floor. Regular, predictable work because the housing market kept turning over. By 2023, that flow had dried up almost completely. Fewer new homeowners because there were fewer sales. These clients who were already settled in their homes were being careful with money. The volume just wasn't there anymore. LL Flooring felt that same contraction across more than 400 locations at once. Foot traffic down nearly a third. Average transaction value dropped from around $1,200 to under $700, which completely wiped out the margins that had kept the operation running. Online sales covered less than 10% of fixed costs. There was no version of the numbers that worked. It didn't fail because the product stopped being useful. It failed because the one thing it absolutely needed, a housing market where homes change hands and owners feel confident enough to invest in them, had been essentially switched off by interest rate policy. When housing freezes, everything that depends on it freezes right along with it. Number 3, American Freight. American Freight adds something to this picture that the others don't quite show. It was a warehouse-style retailer, high ceilings, bulk inventory, right there on the floor. Appliances and furniture priced for buyers who needed real things at real prices but couldn't pay premium. In theory, that model was made for exactly the kind of economy 2024 was. When people are stretched, value-focused retail isn't a niche, it's most of the market. But here's what made things complicated. American Freight wasn't operating on its own. It was part of Franchise Group, a parent company that had built up over $1.8 billion in corporate debt across all its different businesses. When that debt load became unmanageable, the pressure flowed straight down to the subsidiaries. American Freight ended up absorbing financial stress it had never created and had no real way to handle. Appliance and furniture sales had already fallen 26% year over year on top of all that. Average order values dropped 35%, even with heavy discounting that was already eating up whatever margin was left. Freight costs, which are central to any warehouse model, had risen 40% since 2020. Each store needed between $150,000 and $200,000 every single month just to operate. Cash flow had been negative for 5 quarters in a row. Think about who was supposed to be the customer here. A young family in a Midwestern suburb in their first apartment, needing a couch and a coffee table. A few years earlier, Saturday afternoon, load up a borrowed pickup, spend around $800, drive home with a living room. By 2024, that family isn't coming in. Not because they don't need the furniture, they do, and they know their stuff is getting old. But they're carrying credit card balances at 25% interest. Adding more debt for a couch just doesn't survive the math. $300 million in inventory sitting in those warehouses, slowly losing value. Liquidation ended up recovering less than half of it. 340 locations across 41 states went dark, thousands of workers out of jobs. The model itself wasn't wrong. The people who needed it still exist out there. But right now they're surviving, not spending, and a business built on volume has no foundation when the people who should be its customers have been financially stuck in place. Number 2, Party City. There's a specific kind of loss in what happened to Party City that feels different from everything else on this list. Because Party City wasn't selling anything people needed to get through the day, it was selling joy. The balloons for a kid's birthday, the decorations for a graduation, the costumes and streamers for the moments that gave ordinary life something to celebrate. For nearly 4 decades, Party City was in the business of marking the moments that make life feel like it's going somewhere. In 2024, that business became insolvent. By the time the filing came, the company was carrying $1.7 billion in debt, rent up 25%, energy up 40%. Freight costs more than double what they were before the pandemic. And on the other side of all that, 60% of American households were living paycheck to paycheck. Food costs were up over 20%, and grocery bills were consuming hundreds of extra dollars every month that used to go toward everything else. Picture a family getting ready for their son's 10th birthday. A few years before, the trip to Party City is just automatic. $40 or $50 for balloons, some themed plates, a banner. By 2024, that same family is in the kitchen running through different numbers. The grocery bill is up. Gas is unpredictable. The credit card minimum is due. The party still happens, just simpler, more improvised. The Party City trip doesn't make the list anymore. Multiply that one quiet decision across millions of families, across every type of occasion the store existed to serve, and the revenue collapse is pretty straightforward to understand. Each location needed roughly $100,000 a month just to stay open. Revenue per store fell 30% in a single year. Over 850 stores, thousands of employees. An entire supply chain built around the idea of human celebration, gone in a matter of weeks. When a family genuinely has to think twice about whether they can afford to decorate for a birthday, you're not watching a retail story anymore. You're watching what happens when financial pressure gets severe enough that even small moments of joy start to cost more than people can manage. That's where we are. And it brings us to number one. Number one, Big Lots. Every story on this list tells part of something, but Big Lots tells all of it. Because Big Lots wasn't a lifestyle brand. It wasn't serving customers who had a lot of choices. It was a discount chain built specifically for Americans who were already having a hard time. The household that needed a bookshelf but couldn't afford a furniture store. The family that needed new bedding but was tracking every dollar. The person whose budget was tight enough that the difference between $30 and $15 for a storage bin was a real decision that actually mattered. Big Lots was the last affordable option before people had no options, and it failed. Here's the thing that makes that genuinely hard to wrap your head around. Discount retail is supposed to be recession-proof. The whole idea is that when things get tough, people trade down. They stop going to the expensive stores and start going to the cheap ones. By that logic, Big Lots should have been one of the few stores on this list that actually benefited from everything else falling apart. Instead, gross margins fell from 40% to under 20%. Foot traffic dropped 28% year over year. Quarterly losses wiped out over $300 million in shareholder equity across 2 years. In the end, the creditors decided liquidation was the only realistic path. 900 stores. Every part of the country, gone. The households that kept Big Lots running weren't trading down from somewhere more expensive. They were already at the bottom, and by 2024, the bottom had simply run out of room. Think about a single-income household, one person working, full-time at just above minimum wage, supporting 2 kids. For years, a quarterly Big Lots trip was just part of the routine. $60 or $70. A lamp to replace one that broke, new bed sheets, some discounted basics for the kitchen, nothing major, but steady and reliable, month after month across millions of households running on the same kind of thin margin. Then the electric bill went up. Then groceries grew by nearly $200 a month. Then car insurance increased. And every dollar that used to go toward that quarterly trip got pulled back into covering the basics instead. The trip just stopped happening. Not because the household stopped needing those things, because the budget stopped having room for them. When a discount store designed specifically for people who don't have much money fails because those same people have been squeezed out of even that level of spending, the story isn't really about retail anymore. It's about what's actually happened to people. 60% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck. Credit card debt passed $1 trillion for the first time ever. Savings at the lowest point in a decade. The customers Big Lots depended on aren't shopping somewhere cheaper. There is nowhere cheaper left. What this all means: 10 companies, different products, different price points, different types of customers. But take a step back and look at the whole picture, and there's really only one story here. None of these companies failed on their own. None of them went under because of a single bad call or one thing that changed. Every single one of them collapsed under the same combination. Costs going up on one side, people's ability to spend going down on the other, and nothing left in the middle to bridge the gap. Commercial rents up 20 to 25%. Freight up 40% from before the pandemic. Labor up 15 to 18%. Energy at the highest it's been in years. These weren't problems specific to any one company. They hit every physical retailer at exactly the same time. And on the other side, 60% of households living paycheck to paycheck. Credit card debt at a historic high. Savings at a 10-year low. Wages that haven't kept up with the cost of living for years. Ordinary working people paying more for food, housing, healthcare, and energy on paychecks that didn't grow to match. When your costs go up and your customers' spending power goes down, the businesses stuck in between don't make it, especially the ones built to serve people who were already stretched thin to begin with. That's the real story here, not 10 separate failures. One economic condition, showing up in 10 different storefronts. What's been lost is real. The Friday night dinner out, the birthday party, the craft store, the appliance showroom where a young couple once stood and imagined what their first home would look like, the warehouse store where a family furnished their first apartment on a budget, the dollar store where someone on a fixed income made every dollar count as far as it possibly could. None of that was luxury. It was just the ordinary texture of a life that used to be within reach for most people in this country. The shelves are empty. The signs are down. The doors are locked. And the people who used to walk through those doors aren't somewhere else. They're home, running the numbers, figuring out what they can still hold on to. That's not a retail story. That's just where a lot of Americans are right now, and honestly, it's not over yet.